So we're back with the passing show and live with Hal Gill from the bunker. I've got in front of me the preface to the Diamond Jubilee edition of the Secret Teachings of All Ages. The preface here by Manly P. Hall, Los Angeles, 1988. Man had a long life. As is my wont, I'm just going to be showing you the cabinet over there where my cable box sits and the various tiles on Lynn's collection we made over the years together. And, there's the Gunsmith of Williamsburg sitting behind the glass, my father's book from 1974, I think, and one of his best. Real piece of deep scholarship there. And, I've been thinking a lot about all the gifts I have to extend. And Manly P. Hall was actually one that tipped me off to this. And his preface here, he says, on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of this volume, it seemed fitting to reflect on the circumstances that led me to its writing. The original edition was planned and issued in the interval between the termination of World War I and the Great Depression of 1929. During this time, I had a brief career in Wall Street, the outstanding event of which was witnessing a man depressed over investment losses take his life. My fleeting contact with high finance resulted in serious doubts concerning business as it was being conducted at the time. It was apparent that materialism was in complete control of the economic structure, the final objective of which was for the individual to become a part of a system providing an economic security at the expense of the human soul, mind, and body. I felt strongly moved to explore the problem of humanity and origin and destiny. I spent a number of quiet hours in New York Public Library tracing the confused course of civilization. With a very few exceptions, modern authorities downgraded all systems of idealistic philosophy and the deeper aspects of comparative religion. Translations of classical authors could differ greatly, but in most cases the noblest thoughts were eliminated or denigrated. Those more sincere authors whose knowledge of ancient language was profound were never included as required reading, and scholarship was based largely upon the acceptance of a sterile materialism. Fortunately, since contemporary scholarship had little regard for the wisdom of the past, there was no premium on the earlier texts. As a result, I assembled a fair collection of the works of those forgotten sages to whose labors the world owes a tremendous debt of gratitude. It seems that my efforts were timely, and the first two editions of the book were sold out before the volume came off the press. This was certainly a blessing upon the book. Written by a young man in his 20s, it was now passed through a number of editions with over 30 printings and is still a bestseller in its field. We're now coming to the end of the 20th century. This is written in 1988, as mentioned earlier. And the great materialistic progress which we have venerated for so long is on the verge of bankruptcy. We can no longer believe that we are born into this world to accumulate wealth and abandon ourselves to mortal pleasures. We see the dangers and realize that we have been exploited for centuries. We were told that the 20th century was the most progressive that the world has ever known. But unfortunately, the progression was in the direction of self-destruction. To avoid a future war, crime, and bankruptcy, the individual must begin to plan his own destiny, and the best source of the necessary information comes down to us through the writings of the ancients. We have tried to select the most useful and practical elements of classical idealism, combining them into a single volume. The greatest knowledge of all times should be available to the 20th century, not only in the 1 shilling editions of the Bon Library in small type and shabby binding, but in a book that would be a monument, not merely a coffin. John Henry Nash, who designed this book, agreed with me. It is our sincere hope that this book will endure into the 21st century and continue to make available the contents of countless books and manuscripts that have been destroyed by the ravages of war. This volume is devoted to my own opinions, but is not devoted to my own opinions, but is a tribute to the memories and labors of the noblest of mankind. May the 21st century bring with it a restoration of those systems of inspired instruction so desperately needed. Manly P. Hall, Los Angeles, California, October 1st, 1988. So, yes, Mitch Horowitz is doing a lot of work in this area, and we're doing things on Substack. And it's just a real joy, to be able to transmit this knowledge out there. The body, soul, and mind of the human being, is consumed by the machinery of capitalism in ways that are just profligate. Metropolis captured this in the 1920s, though, as well as Manly Hall's book, being a kind of attempt to remedy it. And we all are working towards that, I think, in this field of Substack, for those of us who are writing here. And I see a lot of that anyway. And that's my bubble, probably. There's a lot of other stuff going on as well. I talk to a lot of people here in Washington, D.C. I cross paths with those who hold power. And they're equal, but they don't necessarily recognize me as that. Some do. One of my friends has been traveling around the world back in his career with Arlen Specter, and he was a psychiatrist who interviewed all these different heads of state like Arafat, Fidel Castro, Muammar Gaddafi, Bashar Assad, and the list goes on. And he was really there to keep the enemies closer and your friends close. But Arlen Specter had that idea, and he had an entourage, and he would go and visit with these heads of state, and they would have conversations. And my good friend, a Navy captain and psychiatrist, would psychoanalyze these guys as he met them and, had a chance to talk with them. He wouldn't necessarily tell them that he was there as a psychoanalyst, but that's what he was up to, so that Specter could take that information and use it in his foreign policy role. So Arlen Specter's long gone, and my friend is writing his memoir, I think, now, and it should be really worth reading. I think he's going to call it Lost at Sea. And I don't know, man. It's so important for us to get our hands extended to each other openly, freely, and while there's a whole lot of secret stuff going on and crazy stuff going on, and we learn about like MK Ultra from the 1950s through, and some of it's crazy, some of it's not. The work they did in ESP, for instance, distance viewing, the work at the Monroe Institute. A lot of us would think that's crazy, but suspend judgment. And do your own research. Do your own research. Be your own journalist. A lot of what I do is I get out here on the street and I'll just start filming the passing show and I'll comment on what I see. But my lens is picking up everything. And it's picking up a lot of metadata. And it's telling you a lot about who, what, when, and where. And, mashed up with a whole bunch of other surveillance cameras, you could probably find out a lot about the patterns in popular culture. And I believe that even Substack, as well as, all of the stuff we did on Facebook and Twitter over the years, has been sucked up into the NSA's Pegasus programs or whatever. And I forgot what they are called. Every one of them was just called the program. Sucked up and processed, and artificial intelligence goes raking through it. Young analysts, of course, use it to spy on their girlfriends. But, if you watch Snowden, you know these things. The movie, about Edward Snowden, and you pay attention to what he had to say. He was lucky to be able to protect himself from the fate that that young man, now a young woman, Chelsea Manning, went through. Whistleblowers quite often pay a hell of a price, you know, for trying to get truth out there. But there is no truth when it comes down to it. I'm also a big advocate for the Church of the Subgenius, J.R. Bob Dobbs, the work of W.R.A.W., the Robert Anton Wilson. And we're always reading, here. One of my friends wrote this book, Simple Acts to Change the World. And she's got, 500 Ways to Make a Difference? Amy Neumann. She's actually into the AI field these days. She'd written another one on empowering your nonprofit. And a lot of that's about the use of AI. I haven't read it yet, but I have it. Why Does the World Exist by Jim Holt. This is 10 Best Books, the New York Times Book Review. So, I keep on doing these things. And, I don't know, man. I just know how things seem to me. I could be wrong. It's not necessary that I be correct about everything. I've been listening to Grok's Era, however you pronounce it, who is a vocal AI, and you can have conversations with her, basically. She does a pretty good job of natural language processing. And, one of the things we were doing was talking about Gurdjieff. Here's his Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, and all and everything. First series, I picked that up over at Lost City Books some time ago. Haven't really cracked it open too deeply. It's supposed to be, so thick, to really weed out those people who are not really serious about it. And, that, and it's Stuart Holroyd's Elements of Gnosticism here. Gnosticism would have us believe that the world is produced by an evil god who thinks he's the big cheese, but isn't. I don't know. Gnosticism. Very interesting to me because the idea of knowledge. The only thing I know is that I know how things seem to me, and I could be wrong. I'm skeptical. I keep my mind open. And Manly Hall, of course, was going through and cataloging an awful lot of the esoteric knowledge of the world. The Church of the Subgenius mocks it, and is very entertaining to read. Dobbs is a teacher, The Curse of Bob, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot here, and just very entertaining, but also thought-provoking, because we really don't know. I mean, it's just as plausible that the flying spaghetti monster is in charge of everything. The Pastafarians will tell you. And then, again, Discordianism, 1950s, that came up, and worships the goddess Eris, the goddess of chaos, who I identify as my own anima, the goddess of chaos. She was slighted at a feast of the gods, not invited, so she brought a golden apple, and that was labeled to the fairest, and gave it to Paris, and Paris would have to pick one of the goddesses to give it to. He ended up giving it to Venus because Venus promised him Helen of Troy, and that led to the Trojan Wars. And I was thinking about Paul Feyerabend, the philosopher out of Berkeley, who was a German fella. He was in the German army in World War II, and he's directing traffic in Berlin, actually. He's been killing time. His biography is here by my side somewhere. Anyhow, when he did get shot while directing traffic, he had gotten some really nice gloves from a dead Russian soldier, and they were ruined by being hit in the hand. He was also hit in the back, the spine sort of crippled him. And he just noticed his hand getting hit and the gloves were ruined. And he was like, oh, a shame, I wanted to keep these gloves. It was the glove that was the important thing. In The Conquest of Abundance, he talks about the way in which Homeric language lacked the abstraction that we have, where we keep a distance from reality. They were much more in touch with the real, the immediacy, with the feelings that they had. They weren't as continuous as our abstractions of ourselves tend to be. We think of ourselves as, you know, me from birth to present day, but I am many me's, and I'm constantly transforming in reality. I don't stay the same. I'm not the same Hal Gill I was yesterday. I won't be the same Hal Gill tomorrow, but I'll be doing my best impersonation of him. And I'm an imp, carried around in this animal that I label Harold Bledsoe Gill III, a very impressive label, I must say. Maybe just shows the lack of creativity in my family because grandfather was named that, my father was named that, and I'm named that. So, yeah, the Harold B. Gill Foundation, LLC, that I run is designed to preserve and protect our creative work. I'm not very good at it. I'm the only employee and I'm the only boss. And I am also a flaneur. I'm a boulevardier. I will go out there and walk the streets and amiably take it in without a lot of judgment, with a degree of detachment, with a degree of like, isn't that interesting? A little zen kind of feeling to it. I think that I would have fit right in with the beats in some ways, but maybe not. I may not be anything but myself. I hope to have a degree of authenticity, a degree of reality. Welcome to reality. I like that idea that, in reality, we collectively have a lot of dysfunctions, a lot of functions as well. I remember a fellow years ago who used to go to the 12-step meetings I went to, and he had a t-shirt. He's an old guy. And it just said, I put the fun in dysfunctional. I never saw him smile, but I love that t-shirt. I thought that was amazing. And I'm sure he's long gone. So many people are long gone, not just because they were old and died, but because they were victims of their own demons. I don't know, personifying it as a demon is kind of wrong. Their behaviors, their maladjustments, their circuitry was messed up from the get-go. They didn't get held enough as kids, or they didn't feel safe. So they were always on guard, and they did things to dampen down that anxiety, to that fear. That fear, that inner voice that won't leave you alone, that tells you you're not good enough. You're good enough. We're good enough. We're here. We get an opportunity to play through creation. So what do I want to say about that? I want to look and see how many people are here. There are 20 of us hanging out. Put out a call, by the way, to come on live with me sometime and have a conversation. And we're going to have one. It's going to be Saturday. It's going to be about 11 o'clock my time and about 8 o'clock her time, I think, out on the left coast. And this person has a master's in AI and robotics. So it should be a really interesting conversation. She's interested in qualia and recursive thinking, and we'll learn about those things by conversation. I'm going to hand her the microphone and she's going to talk. So I'm going to listen and I'm going to try to have a conversation and hang with it because I'm not an AI master's degree holder. I'm a holder of a master's degree in German literature, for God's sakes. How that came about. I'm going to break to another story because I like to just jump around. I was taking German courses all through my undergrad. Initially, it was pre-med, but I took a histology course in my senior year. I've talked about that a lot lately. And it was beautiful. I loved it. Studying cells and studying tissues and, our organs at the microscopic level, at the cellular level, how these things go together, collagen fibers and, all this beautiful, beautiful architecture that makes up the human body. Well, went to the lectures in the morning, and in the afternoons, there was quite often a keg in the courtyard, and I was there. I was playing ultimate frisbee or whatever, or I was doing other things I oughtn't have been doing, and I wasn't in the lab enough to really get a good grade. So I didn't get a good grade. I think I got a D in histology, and I decided I really want to be an archaeologist. I was really interested in archaeology because I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, and this was around the time that Ivor Noel Hume was digging up Woolston hometown, the Martin's Hundred. There's a big book by him on Martin's Hundred. And I was interested in that. We didn't have an archaeological department there, so I went to sociology so I could get what I needed to go on for a master's or something in archaeology. My history professor even set me up with a possibility of an internship with a fellow named Broadwater, who was doing dives at Yorktown on the barges. And yeah, we can talk about that some other time. I didn't do it. I thought I needed to work. I needed to work at Powder Magazine and get money for college. And that's what I did in the summers. I worked at the Powder Magazine at least until 1983. And then 1984, I went over to Busch Gardens. I ran into a lot of bumps in the road around then. I stopped drinking abruptly in 1983. And the result of that was I stopped sleeping. Well, I kept taking German courses in college, though, and I got through. I had to add an extra semester for the hospitalization that resulted from me stopping drinking abruptly and getting a very polite diagnosis, not alcoholism, but something else that they could treat with pills. And I was hospitalized for a good bit of the fall semester of 1984. Is that right? No, 1883. Fall semester 83, spring semester 84. I was back and wound my way through 85, had a similar experience the summer of 85 and similar hospitalization. But that time I got introduced to these 12-step groups and I wasn't too impressed, I'll tell you what. That was 40 years ago this summer. About this time, I would have been attending them at 22 years old. I'm now 62. But what do I want to say about that? German courses. And by the time I got to my junior year, I realized I'd majored in German more or less by accident, by always taking these German courses while I was going through everything else I was going through. And I'd been an assistant to the history department at the beginning of 83, but the hospitalization removed that. Or 82, I guess. Not really stitching it together, I guess. Yeah, probably. Because I was fall semester of 82 that I came to the attention of the history professor. He noticed how I could direct the drawing of a map of Europe from the back room on the first day of class, and he called me into his office and said, "Where are you from? I can't place your accent." He was like a Henry Higgins of the Randolph-Macon history department. And I said I was from Williamsburg, Virginia. And I attributed my accent to not only my father and mother coming from different points and to Williamsburg. My mother was from Cresswell, North Carolina. My father from Orange, Virginia. And the Orange people, they have a out sound in their voice. It's a lot like Canadians. I don't know why. One of these days I've got to explore the linguistics of that. I'm sure somebody's done that work. If they haven't, that's a good study to do. Why do people in Orange, Virginia have Canadian out and about and such? I can't do it right myself. But I was also exposed to a lot of English accents, and of course I was raised with Captain Kangaroo and Walter Cronkite and Walt Disney, and I thought they were all one and the same person. Of course, Walt was gone pretty quickly in my life. I think he was only alive when I was 3. I think 66 is when he may have passed away, but Captain Kangaroo hung in there, and Walter too. And 6 o'clock evening news was a big deal in our house. We'd watch the local and then the national news, watch the body counts from Vietnam. I remember that very vividly. Down in Birchwood Gardens was where our house on 108 Dogwood Drive still stands, although the guy who owns it is not taking very good care of it. I'll tell you what, it's really overgrown and really looks terrible. But the gum tree in the front yard is still there. It's a huge tree now. I remember when my father planted it. Anyhow, and where are we going to next? Thunder is out there right now over our heads. Hopefully it won't wipe out my wireless. never had us happened yet. But here in the bunker, we're well protected from all those kinds of things. This building, built about 1904, has been redone probably in the 80s. And Len and I did some work on it as well. I showed around in it not too long back. My German degrees, right? So I got out of college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got tired of Dad reading the want ads over the paper. So I got a job in the foundry, and the governor's palace green has a foundry down behind the Getty House at the corner of Duke of Gloucester and Palace Street. And there I learned how to cast brass, bronze, and silver and sand molds and work pewter and bronze molds. Do a lot of finishing on those castings because, they come out of the molds. They're kind of rough. You got to do a lot of filing, a lot of polishing, a lot of sanding with emery, pumice, tripoli, and rouge to get that nice, bright polish on them. And I did that. I worked at that for 3-4 years. And Doc Hassel was our journeyman. I really loved that guy. But the master of the shop, he had some attitude problems. He had some issues. And I fell out. I got a scholarship or fellowship, really, to do translations of Sprengel's Handwerk in Künste and Tabellen, 1767 to 1777 vocational textbook from the Berlin Realschule. There were a few other volumes added in the 1790s, but the ones I was concerned with were really in the 1760s, particularly 1769. And I have an original of the ironworking and brass founding sections and copper works over on my shelf, over my videos over there in the corner. Some candlesticks over there from the foundry, a pipe tamper. I don't have a lot of relics from those days. But beyond that are some mugs from the Fife and Drum Corps. The bookcase with my set of Goethe's Werke from Jack Hamilton's used bookstore, which was down near Jamestown. Looked like the building was abandoned last time I went by there. Jack's gone. Doc's gone. Oh, there's so many of these guys gone. Doc, the journeyman, oh man, he was a third cousin once removed. His family stemmed from down in North Carolina, where my mother's from. His last name was Hassel. My maternal grandmother's maiden name was Hassel, Mildred May Hassel. And he was George Hassel, but his sister couldn't say George, so she called him Doc, and it stuck. And the doctor, as we called him, was a Latin scholar. He had learned it, I guess, coming up through the years, and been a student at UVA and dropped out in 1968 to become an apprentice in the foundry. I think that's what he did for a living. Very bright. He really was one of the more, what should I say? I should say Doc is like a Renaissance man of sorts, but he was very quiet and kind of unassuming. And a lot of those guys are. A lot of those guys are just geniuses, but they also are humble and they're dedicated to the preservation of historic trades. Doc could point out that, what we were doing there was really the pinnacle of hand work. Because right after this period in which we're representing in Williamsburg, the 18th century, you have the industrialization take over. And by the 19th century, a lot of these hand trades have transformed tremendously. Now, you can still find people who do brass founding. Virginia Metal Works is closed now, but they were doing it in a more industrial kind of way, providing reproductions to the foundation and all over the place, really. Virginia Metal Crafters was quite an outfit. Out in Stanton, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is where they were based. Although I also have visions of them being somewhere else. And having gone by there, never went in. I did go into a bell foundry not too long back, though, that's down near Doswell, Virginia. It's not Doswell proper, but there's a fella down there who's doing that work and really making some large bells and pretty impressive work. I really would like to go down there and see what he's doing again someday. Okay, so we're on to bell founding. I love melting things, right? Fire, they forge. I ended up moving to the gunsmith shop after falling out with the master of the foundry. I negotiated a transfer, and they were planning to transfer this guy from the silversmith to the gunsmiths, basically to get rid of him. But I figured, hey, the gunsmiths don't want this guy. The silversmiths don't want him. They're trying to get him out of there. So give him to the foundry. He was there 20 years. They finally made a cut and of like the middle folks, and he lost his job, which is sad. But he did have 20 years there, and hopefully he's got a bit of a pension from that. I certainly hope he's landed on his feet. But yeah, I sort of stuck my junior apprentice to me with this guy for 20 years plus, and they didn't get along. It's sad. Doc said he did what he could, try to make that work, but it didn't really work. And yeah, God bless him. What can I say? I was young, and I was also, I got my knickers in a twist. I would do stuff I would even shoot myself in the foot to some degree, because I took quite a cut to go to the gunsmiths. My then wife had costumed them. She was working in the costume design center by that time, behind the scenes, and they were doing a lot more authentic costuming then. And she was really good at what she did. She was head of shop at the University of Alaska Fairbanks Theater before coming to us when she was completing her undergraduate work up there. I think she graduated summa cum laude, magna cum laude, I forget, but she was smart. And she was talented, and she was beautiful. Then I married her, but the other women around there hated her. And they didn't want me to be with her. In fact, they abducted me on the ferry one time from Jamestown after we'd gone to a party over in Surrey, and they could see we were getting together, and they abducted me, tried to get me away from her, my fellow female friends. It was funny and sad at the same time. But I was not to be dissuaded. I mean, I knew a good thing when I saw it, I thought. But her character, they probably knew better than I did. And yeah, it didn't work. We had about 3 or 4 years togetherness that were good. And then ex-boyfriend from high school got into correspondence with her, which I did not dissuade. I was aware of it. But he was willing to come back into her life. And when I went for my interviews at Pitt, I found out she was thinking of divorcing me. By that time, she had taken a job 500 miles away. I'd put her through school to teach art. And man, I've detailed all that out in some of my writings lately, the posts and such. And I'm telling you guys now because I'm sitting here at night, Lynn's in bed, and I'm just killing time until I feel like I'm tired enough to go and sleep. But yeah, that was hard. And I made it as easy as I could by realizing that, people make choices, and I can't control other people's choices. What I can do is accept them as gracefully as possible and be the best human being I know how to be. I can't say that I'm really proud of the fact that I was a little condescending. I got her a journal and said, journal in this and I'll be okay with whatever you come out with on the other side. And I was talking to somebody years later about that, and he said, well, that was kind of condescending, wasn't it? And I was like, oh my God, you're right. It was. Didn't mean it to be. That wasn't my intent. I was trying to be the best person I knew how to be, and maybe that's what I was, the best person I knew how to be, who was a condescending jerk. But it didn't matter. She did what she did. She got what she got. She married that guy. They had a kid. I like to consider the children of women who I break up with after the children they have afterwards. If I'd maintained my relationships with them, it's monogamous relationships, if that's possible, those kids wouldn't exist, ideally. But they do. And as a result, I consider them my anti-children. It's a concept I made up myself to sort of assuage myself from not having kids of my own. And you don't have to pay for anti-children. Somebody else's responsibility. It's somebody else's problem. You all familiar with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the SCP field? It's a particularly effective invisibility field. When something is somebody else's problem, they can't see it. An SCP field. Anyways, my anti-children are somebody else's problem and somebody else's blessing too, I expect. Got a lot of them. I seem to be one of these guys who, dates a woman and the very next guy she goes with, they end up having kids, marrying, settling down, in many cases permanently seems, and that's great. I'm really happy for them. I get my little heart broken, and then I'm like, well, that's the way it goes. Women are like comets. They come into your life and they knock you into a different orbit. But I'm in a steady orbit now. I got married in 2008. Wonderful woman from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Originally, I met her here in D.C., right down the street at a bead shop called Bedazzled. Lynn had a business back then before her stroke that paralyzed her on the left and precludes her from making jewelry now. She had this little jewelry making business where she'd get beads and design and do really beautiful stuff. She has very good taste. And she called it Hanging by a Thread. Just love that name. And oh God, if you want to be a jewelry beater, and that company name is taken, but you probably could do it. I don't think she ever incorporated or anything or made it an LLC. Not like the Harold B. Gill Foundation. That is a formal limited liability corporation here in D.C. as of last September. I'm very grateful for the ability to have done that. Len supported that after I stopped working for the contract I was on at the government's behest. They decided I needed to go, and I went. It's funny because it was the 1 year anniversary after I've been saddled with being the interim program manager until they could hire one from the prime contractor. I'm a sub. I was a sub. And, yeah, they found somebody. They found somebody to do that work with the right credentials. I did not have them myself. I did not want them. I did not want the gig necessarily, but to save the contract, I did the work. Righted the ship as the one of the chiefs of the branches of the enterprise architecture team, and acknowledged she was the applied architecture branch chief. She had been actually at HUD before, and I had worked under her there briefly. The Housing and Urban Development Department. I've worked all over the federal government over the course of the past 20 plus years, and it's been lucrative, but it's not been my cup of tea. And that's where we started. We started with talking about, how materialism and the way in which historically, these systems we have been kind of bad to us as humanity. Says, the the final objective of the economic structure is for the individual to become a part of the system, providing economic security at the expense of the human soul, mind, and body. And again, I was going back to Metropolis, that Weimar cinema piece where you have the young man noticing how the machinery becomes like Moloch and consuming the human beings going into the factory. I don't know. I just know it seems to me. I could be wrong. But I do feel that there is a lot of that people are consumed. People are in fear of, economic insecurity. Things have been set up and we've allowed it at some level or another. People supposedly have the power, but we don't exercise it effectively. I think if we want change, what we have to do is acknowledge that every cent spent is a vote for the kind of world we want to continue. And we have to defund those things that we do not support. And that takes guts because you got Walmart, you got, Amazon, you name it, our consumer economy. And we could force change as a trim tab on society. I mean, you got that big rudder on an ocean liner, you got a little trim tab on it to help turn the rudder. The individual in society is like a trim tab. Bucky Fuller talked about that, and Jeff Bridges reiterated it in his acceptance of the Golden Globe Awards. Oh, God, I could go on and often do. I was actually thinking more of talking about Joseph Campbell and comparative religion and Alan Watts and you name it. There's so many people that have shown us the door. There's a line in Tommy where Pete writes, Messiah, you've been told many times before Messiah is pointed to the door, no one had the guts to leave the temple. Well, that's it, right? By being consumers, by being who we are, we're not willing to inconvenience ourselves. We're willing to complain, but are we willing to take action? Pete also has a great song called Let's See Action. Everything is nothing. Nothing is everything. I forget exactly how that title goes, but it's a refrain in the background, part of it. But the idea is let's see action. Let's see people. Let's see freedom. Let's see who cares. Who cares? And actually, that's part of their nonprofit, right? Who cares? That helps the Teenage Cancer Trust. Oh, there's so many good things that our artists do to help transform the world. There's so many good causes out there we can support. We can take our contributions, we can actively try to give as much as we can so that we don't have to pay any tax to the federal government. Because the federal government's going to use it, and they are using it to do what? Buy more weapons, splatter people in other countries. The age of empire is with us. There was a time when I didn't think the United States went out there and slaughtered people for no good reason, but I watched it on TV as a kid. I should have known better. Vietnam War. And then we went and intervened in Grenada. We intervened in Beirut. Remember in 1983 what that was like when we saw the barracks in Beirut the Marines were in get blasted. And so many kids my age dying out there. And so right now, I don't know that we're losing a lot of troops in the engagements we're in out there in the world. I'm not tracking it, I wish I was. I mean, what was time we used to track those things, like what was happening in Iraq. You could at least see on PBS in the evening. The PBS News was showing the faces of the fallen during the occupation of Iraq and the insurgencies. And they're here, they're here in Walter Reed and the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And I'm close to that. I don't know what else to say about it. I'm just so distressed when I think about the kind of energy that we pour into that. And money is energy. Make no mistake. It's a form of energy. Everything is energy and vibration. Frequency, vibration. Think about that. And it's kind of music. Some of it's cacophonous. Some of it's just incredibly violent, incredibly destructive, but it can also be so constructive and healing as well. Getting back to the healing power of music, that's one of the themes that's been on my mind. I've been trying to amplify signals through the noise. Among other things, I'm a fifer, as I may have mentioned. Fife and drum was a big part of my life. It was back in the day we were performing in Colonial Williamsburg from the age of 11 when I was trained, and I think I was 12 before I actually donned a uniform and went out on the field. And then, 13, 14. By the time I was 15, I was an instructor and a member of the senior corps and sergeant in rank because we did a military rank system. And I remember passing tunes to go to Canada. But before that, we went to the Von Steuben Day Festival Parade. That was 1978. And we stayed in a motel in North Philly, and across the street, there was a graveyard. And so we went across the Route 1, dangerous enough as it was, and we partied in the graveyard until the wee hours. That's insane, right? I developed my love of Budweiser right then and there. That's where it all went wrong. And after that, I got it whenever I could and kept on doing that right up until I was 20. It's about 5 years. And that summer, when I was 20, I was getting it every day and profusion. And then I quit cold turkey. And I thought that was a good idea. It wasn't. I didn't sleep after that. And I noticed I didn't need to sleep. So I slept like 30 hours sprinkled into 30 days, and burned up my body basically just by sheer brain power, I think, and racing thoughts and the dream state, the kind of pattern recognition, apophenia, which is the recognition of patterns that don't exist. So everything is connected, and your brain is connected to the stars, and, I was just out of my head. So you got to be careful with this stuff. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has come up with guidelines over the safe amount of alcohol for human consumption, which is none at all. Prohibition doesn't work, but maybe awareness and knowledge could work if more people knew that, and we can know it. We have the power and the right to know, which is delivered into our hands by the internet. All you have to do is go to Google, look up WHO alcohol guidelines. It'll come up. And if we don't heed it, then that's on us. We have a responsibility for our own actions, economic actions, choices we make. The wheels of the economy cannot turn if we throw ourselves onto the gears and levers and refuse to let the machine run. The machine can be stopped. If you stop it, that's inconvenient, right? That's going to make everybody kind of like, oh my God, this machine stopped. What are we going to do? Well, maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we won't. Because most of us like our comfort, and we're kind of slackers, right? We want to be able to just talk about it like I'm doing now, as opposed to doing anything about it. I do what I can. I got to admit, I do give away probably a lot more than I ought to. I'll subscribe to people on Substack versus subscribing to the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal. I've subscribed to all these things in the past, The Economist. So I'm cutting off the mainstream media. It's a propaganda arm of the political parties and the corporatism. Now, Mussolini said that fascism and corporatism are really the same thing. He thought fascism would be much better called corporatism. I don't know if he said much better, but you get the idea. And, well, it's important to recognize it for what it is. These corporations can't do jack without us funding them. And we have to fund them in order to have the things that they provide. Can we do without the things they provide? That's my question. It's pretty simple. It's not really complicated. Would a general strike help? I bet it would. It's always worked at some level or another. Now, sometimes it's resulted in the death of the strikers. But what are we really fighting for here? Our freedom from corporatism? I would suggest that maybe we ought to fight against that. I was talking about Fife and Drum a little bit ago. I had a really nice experience on the Pride Parade. I'm not really interested too much in what people's orientation is. Mine is straight white male, blue-eyed. I'm the problem, right? Our standards, and I don't deny it. But I was out there as an ally, and I was fifing in the middle of the fifers. I was really digging it. We were waving at the crowd. We were having a blast. Now, waving at the crowd is not what we do in the Colonial Williamsburg Fife and Drum Corps. It's very military. It's very regimented. We hardly acknowledge our audience, but this was a lot of fun. We were acknowledging our audience. We were playing our asses off. It was hot, but it was not impossible. And we were colorful. We had this beautiful rainbow coalition of fife and drum guys, a lot of them from the old guard. Some others came from like the Monocacy Fife and Drum Corps up near Frederick, Maryland. There was a fair number of people from the Monumental Fife and Drum Corps in Baltimore. I think people from the George Mason Fife and Drum Corps down in Virginia, Northern Virginia. I think I saw some old guard folks, of course, in our ranks, and it was just, you had a blast. And I think the crowd really loved us. And that's really what makes it, right, is when the crowd loves you. When I get back together with the alumni, we'll march in the Williamsburg Community Christmas Parade. And we usually lead it off, and we quite often win the award for the best unit. And it's just a lot of fun to watch. Everybody lining the streets, and people love us, and they know our tunes. They've gotten to the point where they recognize our tune, the Black Bear. We used to yell something rather rude, an acronym that we don't do anymore. But now we yell out, some names of people we want to honor, like our former adult leaders who passed. There have been several of those are fallen because we've been around coming up on 70 years in 2018. And 2023, we had our 65th anniversary. And it's a long time. So the original Pfeiffer, he didn't make 65. He made 60, but he didn't make 65. Um, he was in his 70s when he passed. And then, there were so many others. And just wonderful people to hang out with in many ways. And some of them are jerks. And particularly, there's this thing that happened around the millennium, I think. There's kids who came of age about 2000 and therein. Some of them are real. I don't know. I don't know what to describe it as, but maybe I was just like that when I was that age. It's possible. I don't remember. Don't think I was like that. But the arrogance, the kind of entitlement, the kind of uh, disrespect of elders. I don't remember being like that. I'm particularly interested in my elders because they've got history, right? They were there when things were different. Things were very different in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Williamsburg was a wild place in the 60s and 70s. I was witness to it a lot, particularly once I joined the Fife and Drum Corps in 74 and stayed in till 81. Then went on, 81, they were starting to clamp down on things. You got the Just Say No campaigns and things like that. But before that, boy, anything went. In the Carter administration, tail end of the Nixon, I guess, was 73, right? When he sort of screwed up and had to resign. But Ford, Nixon, Ford, and then Carter, those administrations, things were interesting. 76, the bicentennial, really big deal. I was 13. I got an opportunity to participate. And it was sort of full circle because my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Jones Gill, had been at the Battle of Yorktown. Serving under Matt Anthony Wayne, he would have been under Thomas Nelson, but Thomas Nelson was sick during that time, and Matt Anthony Wayne was commanding those Virginia troops of the Virginia militia. And, he got a chance to be there as a young man. He was about 17 in 81. And then he moved up into Amherst County and settled down with patients, not only his wife, and they, I guess, farmed. His son Curtis built a very nice house, had quite a estate before he passed away in 1884, 1882. Stitching it together, I think he was born 1810. I think he died in 1882. Heart attack got him. I think he was out on a hunting trip, and they got him to a cabin, and he passed. He didn't survive it. It's kind of young because his father made it to 80. His son, my great-great-grandfather, made it to 93, if I'm not mistaken. My own father made it to 91. His grandfather had made it to 83. My grandfather only made it to 72, but he used to rip the filters off of Raleigh's cigarettes that came with coupons on them, because he didn't like to, smoke the cigarettes through a filter. Just, amazing behaviors that we don't do much anymore, smoking ourselves to death. But my grandfather certainly did smoke a lot. He was an electrician and ran a Gill Electric company. He was an electrical engineer. He was an inventor. He did a lot of, cobbling things together. It was really nice. I went to the gunsmith shop and I ran into the former journeyman there, now retired. I guess he was master for a while as well, George Suter. And George said, I was just thinking about your dad. I was using this electric hacksaw he gave me. And he started to describe it as kind of a Rube Goldberg affair with an electric motor on it and to move the saw blade back and forth so you didn't have to. It's kind of a crazy implement. And I said, that sounds like a Gill Electric Company original, something my grandfather would have cobbled together. My grandfather built steam accumulators, electric ones, because there was a coal-fired one that one of the dairy farmers had. The Department of Agriculture required the cleaning of dairy equipment with steam. And this coal-fired one was dirty, heavy, difficult to move around, so my grandfather invented an electric one. And he ended up having a fair amount of business in Cuba before the revolution. Revolutions had cut into that, and then, one thing led to another, and the USDA decided chemical cleaning had to be done instead of steam cleaning on dairy equipment, and that sort of did end his business on his steam accumulators. But he made water heaters, and he was able to, sell them locally at a fairly good rate, and GE tried to put him out of business by lowering the prices of theirs. There's a lot of corporate power trying to destroy small business even then, and entrepreneurs like him. And yeah, God bless him. He worked hard at his trade, but he loved it. He had workshops, and he was just a quiet yet thoughtful man. I've got books here that he had. There's one. He had quite a few that were about things like the Sermon on the Mount, New Thought kind of stuff, things that were all about, training your mind to be efficient and effective. Interesting guy. I've got a lot of his books. I've got a lot of my father's books too, and I've got a lot of my own books. Oh my God, it's quite a library. And I feel like I need to downsize quite a bit because the condo isn't that big. And my wife is not really down with the clutter and how I like to pile books around me. I've been talking a little bit earlier about Mitch Horowitz and his work. How long have I been on here anyway? I don't think it's showing me a timer. This one's called Happy Warriors, The Lives, Ideas of Positive Mind Mystics. So if you don't know Mitch, check him out. He's on Substack. We're doing a 30-day mental diet. This is another one I've got here, Exuberance, The Passion for Life by K. Redfield Jameson. Love that. What else have I got? Oh, Michael Chabon has just joined Substack like last week, and that was really exciting. A Model World is here, and then Reading and Writing Along the Borderlines, Maps and Legend. The map is not the territory. I don't know if he gets into that much. Oh, and I have another book here that I want to show you and talk about a little bit. This is The Writing Life by Annie Dillard. I had a close encounter 1 degree away or 2 degrees away in 2015. It was September 10th. Went to hang out at a club in the neighborhood and saw a guy I knew from Pittsburgh there. I was like, hey, Jim, what are you doing in town? Let's go to breakfast. So we went over to the Daily Grill, and that's by the Georgetown Inn, no longer there. But I bought Jim breakfast and I asked him why he was in town. And he said, well, my sister-in-law is getting a medal at the White House. I was like, Jim, who the heck is your sister-in-law? His sister-in-law is Annie Dillard. I was like, knock me over with a feather. And I love writers, I love them. And I want to be one. I am one of sorts. I mean, I write. And I write like I talk, they tell me. But I don't know, man. I'd like to be a little more structured than I am being at the moment in my talking. Oh, what else have I got? Jung on Active Imagination from Encountering Jung. I love that stuff. Always helps me. Been doing some active imagination lately, and you know what? The books just fell over. Put that one down. Lean over. Pick up the one I was trying to pick up. The The Hermetic Museum, Alchemy and Mysticism from Taschen. I love these Taschen books. One of the first things you encounter in this one is an introduction. And I was reading it. Dang it. I don't know if it's here or not. There was a section, was it in the other one? Was it in Symbols? About the hammer, the Forge of Los. LOS. May have been in that. Possibly. Anyway, I was going to read about that. The in-breath, the out-breath, the beat of the heart. So important to keep breath in the body, to be. You know, the spiritual people talk about a lot, and I can just about feel like somebody's sticking an ice pick in my ear when I hear the word spiritual. If you're breathing, spiritus, Latin for breath, you're having a spiritual experience. Stop breathing. See how long spirit and body stay together. It's very concrete. It's not airy-fairy supernatural stuff. We're living that magic every time we take an in-breath, every time we take an out-breath, the swinging door of I coming in and out. That's what it's all about to me. Just really simple stuff. Not very complicated. Hey, Don J. I see you said yes. That's lovely. Ace joined. Don't know Ace. Dinchell, the Creator's Place, Sam Cornels. I wonder how many people are actually with me. I have had a total of 29 join this live broadcast. I don't think they're all here, but you know what is kind of cool is you're sitting there talking to disembodied spirits, so to speak. In this cyberspace world, you can see what I'm seeing through my focusing in on the reflection of my lamp over here. There's my hand. And that's it. You know, I'm taking my inspiration for doing these kinds of things from Patti Smith. Now, she'll actually swing the camera around and sit there and talk at the camera. And it feels very immediate and very real and very authentic. And it is. I don't think she puts anybody on. She's not made up. And a lot of times she's just getting ready for bed or something. She checks in with her subscribers. Such a generosity of spirit is exhibited in that. And it's just all I can do not to, just, I don't know, bow down and acknowledge the gift that's being given. Her daughter, Jessie Paris Smith, also is one of my favorites on Facebook, and I have become a paid subscriber there. And, she sent me stuff for Christmas, for God's sakes. A little string of lights among them that went around our little tree that we put up over there on the bookcase. My wife will move my shrine of my fife and drum mugs and my photographs of me, and my father's photograph is on top of the Goethe set right now. It's a shot he did in black and white of the interior of Bruton Parish Church from outside the window, sunbeams coming through. It's a pretty nice artistic photograph. My father had a good eye, and he did a lot of black and white photography. Oh, I don't know. I got so many things I could talk about around me. I was talking about Paul Feyerabend and the Conquest of Abundance, this posthumous book, A Tale of Abstraction versus the Richness of Being. We abstract things and therefore cut down that richness of being to manageable levels. He also wrote, and the most famous for, Against Method, Paul Feyerabend. Is kind of anarchic in his philosophy. He's worth reading. His biography, I just love. They translated the title as Killing Time. There's Paul, the autobiography, Paul Feyerabend. I enjoyed this book so much. I just can't tell you how much. But the German original is actually not called Killing Time, literally, though it can be translated that way. It's called Zeitverschwendung. Yeah, which is wasting time. It's a little beyond killing it. It's actually wasting it. Wasting time. I love that. Oh, I've done a lot of talking lately about Buddy. Creative writing professor at Pitt, Lewis Norden, boy with loaded gun. Check out that photograph. Isn't that beautiful? He's a beautiful man. Let's see. Let's see what it says here about it. Nothing is sacred off limits for Lewis Norden. As a prose stylist, Norden is capable of a range of effects from the broadest slapstick comedy to the subtlest evocation of the lush, dangerous beauty of delta and swamp. That's from the Atlanta Journal Constitution. And it goes on. What he alone brings to the page is the courage to use nothing less than black powder prose itself to blast some sense into us, no matter where we've come to ground. In Norden's skillful hands, facts become slippery, magical, humorous, and black. That's the Houston Post. Newsweek said flights of fancy keep bumping into the hard facts of life. He conjures up a southern fried childhood that's as dark, hilarious, and affecting as anything you're likely to encounter, the plain dealer from Cleveland, a master of the landscapes of the broken heart, said the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The reason nothing is sacred to him is because everything appears holy with him. Nashville Banner. If you call yourself a serious reader, but you haven't discovered Lewis Norden, shame on you, said the Seattle Times. Let me read you some. Dang it. Alchemy over there. Against method, killing time, don't fall over. I just love my stacks of books. I hope you love my stacks of books too. By the way, notice I've got an autographed copy. He did not autograph this for me, actually. I got this online somewhere. I bought it, though, in 2000, just before I left for Denmark. And I wanted to read you the author's note. He starts out with a quote from Catherine Ann Porter. He says, "My life has been incredible. I don't believe a word of it." And that's kind of key. The author's note says, "I couldn't decide whether to call this book a memoir or not." Let's back it up there so you can see it. So I put the problem to my wife. I said, "If you were working at the Library of Congress, how would you list this one?" She said, "Norden, Lewis." I said, "No, I mean," she said, "ISBN, whatever. Fiction or nonfiction?" I said, "It seems to fall somewhere between the two." Should try to focus this somewhere else. She said, "You made up your memoir?" "Names mostly, you know." She said, "You didn't mention my name, did you?" "I changed your name. I changed all the names. That's what I'm saying. If all you changed was names and conversations, I made up some conversations. Still, I'd say memoir. And maybe I exaggerated some stuff too. Some of the painful stuff, death and like that." I might read another section after this. So it goes on this author's note. She says, "Grief therapy, excellent. Self-help, popular psychology." He says, No. She says, "You didn't include any recipes, did you?" "The book's about me, basically, who I am and," "Oh, I see where you're going with this. A how-to guide for jackasses." Sounds like my wife. He says, "Really, I'm just trying to decide between fiction and nonfiction." She says, Okay, give me some of the chapter titles. That might help." I said, "There's a chapter called The Man I Killed." She says, "Murder mystery. Up and away. Comics. Zit in the Art of Mail Order. Eastern religions. One on Emmett Till. Historical. Tell me, Ramon Fernandez, if you know. Poetry. The Amazing Technicolor Effing Machine." This stopped her. Say what? There's a chapter called The Amazing Technicolor Effing Machine. Musical comedy? Probably not. What's an effing machine? Effing. It's a euphemism. You know, I'm embarrassed. The F word. Jeez. That's the title of one of your chapters? You wrote a book about you being an effing machine? Not nonfiction is pretty much off the table at this point. Honey, listen, we might be looking at fantasy here. It's not me. I'm not the effing machine. It's a machine, and an actual machine. You wrote a book about a machine that you wrote about a machine that, and he says, right. You're willing, you're telling me you've written a science fiction memoir? A science fiction memoir is impossible to catalog. I have to tell you. He says, no, this part, it's not fiction. It's real. The effing machine is true. For a long time, she only looked at me. All right, she said. Let's move on. More chapter titles. Let's go. The Land of Dreamy Dreams. Travel. Violence in America. Sociology. It was pretty clear we were getting nowhere. She said, so anyway, I said, yeah. She said, so about this machine. The effing machine? Right. I said, yeah. She said, where do you keep it? I was a little too blue, but, it's kind of a raw meat memoir, according to one fellow who reviewed it. He said, I don't know that I would have written about that. Home in the Woods. Let's see, that's about Itabena, Mississippi, where he's from. It was going to be called Don't Cry for Me, Itabena, but he was realizing people wouldn't realize that Itabena rhymes with Argentina because it's Itabena, which means house in the woods, apparently. Up and away. This is actually not a bad one. Let's see if I read it. The first TV set I ever saw sat in a large bare room in a business establishment in Itabena called Spock Butane Gas Company. Spock Butane was a prosperous little corporation in this farming community, and it furnished propane fuel to farmers for tractors and home heating and other purposes. The building was long and low and held several spaces for rent, including a small apartment and a couple of shops. So it was the closest thing Itabena was likely to have to an office building, save only City Hall. One Saturday afternoon during the matinee, the town was rocked by an explosion. When I ran out of the theater to see what had happened, one end of Spock Butane had been blown to smithereens. Bricks were everywhere, and a man had been killed. That would happen later, though. It has nothing to do with the television set, except that once Itabenans laid eyes on a magic tube, no strangeness or suddenness, even violence, seemed surprising to us again. An explosion and death seemed to me, anyway, a part of the logic of the expanding universe once television had been introduced into it. Spock Butane Building housed the first businesses on one of the two main streets in the town center. Near it stood Mr. Hooton's shoe shop, which still had cowboy-style wooden sidewalks. The Dixie Theater for blacks only was next, then the Strand Theater for whites only, except in the balcony. There was There was a 10-cent store, 3 Chinese-owned groceries, a Jewish-owned dry goods store, a Sicilian-owned dry goods place, 2 drugstores, the bank, city hall, and jail, the dry cleaners, the frozen food locker, the VFW hut, which had slot machines and poker tables, Dr. Moore's hardware, Belk's, Dr. Hightower's medical office, and the the Kingfisher Cafe for blacks only. Roebuck Lake, a beautiful, snaky body of water, ran through the middle of town. For a while, there was a soap factory near the jail, and every day the alley between would be filled with billows of soap suds. Itabena was a prosperous little community, and the Spocks were among the most prosperous citizens. They drove a Cadillac and seemed to me a family with many blessings, the television set among the richest of those blessings. They raised Great Danes, which they allowed to run free. This was common and safe in the small town south. Pony-like creatures with slobbering mouths and India rubber tongues and gleaming coats. The Spocks had 2 handsome sons, a year or 2 older than me, who in high school drove a new red Mercury coupe. A TV set had a 17-inch screen, the biggest available at the time, and was housed in a large wood cabinet. The room where it sat, with its long expanse of concrete floor and overhead fluorescent lighting, was deep and long, and on the set sat a good distance from where you stood to watch. Someone explained that the farther away from the screen you stood, the better the reception was. This theory I've never fully parsed. The TV was kept playing day and night. In a sense, it was impossible. Since it was impossible to miss anything. In any case, people didn't watch programs. Expectation of programming and not entered in our intellectual purview. Content was unimportant. We watched the set. What the set was doing by being turned on was really all that mattered. The idea of a picture appearing there before us was far more interesting than anything we might actually see on the screen, and so no one cared what the program at any given time might happen to be. The nearest television stations to Edabina were WLBT in Jackson, 100 miles to the south, and WMCT in Memphis, slightly further to the north. So, although the television played day and night on one of those two channels, it was rare day that a recognizable picture ever actually appeared for viewers' eyes. A few times on Saturday afternoons, I actually saw an inning or two of baseball being played somewhere. The reception and sound were never good enough to discern which teams were playing or whether there was a ball or strike or hit or foul, but it was baseball. You could tell this clearly, and this knowledge was enough. To correct the problem of poor reception, Mr. Spock constructed an outside antenna for the set. No, not merely an antenna, but a tower. The most impressive solution to poor television reception or any other problem that Delta Eyes had ever imagined. He had built on top of the Spock bought butane on a massive base of concrete, a 200-foot steel tower standing upon four wide stretched steel legs and reaching to heaven. It was the tallest structure within 100 miles. I was awestruck by the sight of it. I could not take my eyes away. The Spock antenna was, I should have thought, a virtual close encounter. If little green men had been espied scampering up and down its imposing legs, I, for one, would not have been surprised. Its girth and height made clear once and for all that invisible forces existed everywhere around us. For the first time, we began to see real pictures. Pictures floated, invisible upon the air we breathed, and were given shape by Spock's antenna. Men and women in conversation, men reading the news, sports games that you could actually follow. Programming made sense. Pictures were everywhere around us. I was breathing pictures into my very lungs. I wanted to gasp for breath. Pictures down inside the air sacs, pictures up at my nose, pictures gliding in and out between my legs like ocean fish in Gulf waters. Pictures were all over me, even when the TV set was not on, in my ears, in my eyes, on the food. At meals, I was eating pictures. I swallowed them in the sweet tea. I pissed and shat pictures. I washed electrical pictures from my flesh with my Sunday night bath, Saturday night bath, sorry. Herb Philbrick, Milton Berle swirled away down my drain. The guy wires, those taut, thick cables of twisted steel, fairly sang in a strong breeze. The tower swayed and rocked and creaked like goose's bones. My head swam. The world changed. Idabina was no longer content to stop along the sidewalk to watch television at the end of a long room. Now we have to have them in our own homes. That summer television sets began to spring up everywhere, as the crocuses had done in the spring. We were resigned to poor reception. Ownership was the key to happiness, not reception. And it goes on to talk about how he gets a TV and he's so excited as he's in his Superman cape. throws himself off of the porch as if he's going to fly like Superman, but he lands on his head on the concrete sidewalk, and he gets his head bandaged, but he has to sit and watch TV and have things brought to him. That's kind of what we do these days. We sit and watch TV. Zen and the Art of Mail Order. Yeah, it's just a great book in a lot of ways. I've turned some people onto it, and at least one of them bought it and read it pretty much on the suggestion that I made about how great it was. And it's kind of great, but it's scary as hell at different points, and it's heartbreaking. Humor and Heartbreak actually is the name of a volume of essays that were done in Buddy's honor. Down at Auburn University, they had what they call Buddy Fest. So, anyway, no one joined. Oh, that's lovely. Ganesha and Yusufa. That's 31 people besides me now. So, anyway, that's Boy with Loaded Gun. What else we got here? Oh, we got Wonder Boys. I love this book. This is another Michael Chabon. This one I picked up at Capitol Hill. What Capitol Hill Books is the other bookstore that's on East Capitol Street. Autographed by Michael Chabon to Kelly, and I don't know who Kelly was. Werewolves in Their Youth, The Model World, and Other Stories and the Mysteries of Pittsburgh. That were the books he'd done at that time. This one came out in 95. I was in Pittsburgh then. And in 99, they made a movie about it. In the spring semester, they were filming at Carnegie Mellon University. I had to give up my classroom because they were filming. And the first opening scene of the movie Wonder Boys takes place in the classroom I used to teaching German. Shows Michael Douglas teaching a workshop of writers. And in it, Tobey Maguire plays one of the writers. Another one is Katie Holmes. And they are part of the ensemble cast. And Robert Downey Jr. is in it, Francis Drummond, Michael Douglas is playing the part of Grady Tripp, who was on the cover of this one. This is obviously the one that came out after the movie was done. And it's just a great book. I think its opening line, if I'm not mistaken, is something Michael wrote about recently in one of his Substack blogs. Actually, he's also quoted Joseph Conrad here. Let them think what they liked, but I didn't mean to drown myself. I meant to swim till I sank. But that's not the same thing. And then says the author would like to thank Mary Evans and Douglas Tigris and Euphrates of this little empire. Okay. I don't know what that. Let's see. Yep. The first real writer I ever knew was a man who did all of his work under the name of August von Zorn. And that was his first sentence. It just came out of him. He had been working on a never-ending novel, something about the fountain. I forget what. And he couldn't seem to bring that to fruition. But he wrote this sentence, and then he continued writing. It says, he lived at the McClellan Hotel, which my grandmother owned in the uppermost room of its turret, and taught English literature at Coxley, a small college on the other side of the minor Pennsylvania River that split our town in two. His real name was Alfred Vetch, and his field, I believe, was Blake. I remember he kept a framed print of the Ancient of Days affixed to the faded blocked wallpaper of his room above a stoop-shouldered wooden soup rack that once belonged to my father. Mr. Vetch's wife had been living in a sanatorium up near Erie since the deaths of their teenage sons in a backyard explosion some years earlier, and it was always my impression that he wrote in part to earn the money to keep her there. He wrote horror stories, hundreds of them, many of which were eventually published in such periodicals of the day as Weird Tales, Strange Stories, Black Tower, and the like. They were in the Gothic mode after the manner of Lovecraft, set in quiet little Pennsylvania towns that had the misfortune to have been built over the forgotten sites of visitations by bloodthirsty alien gods and of the Iroquois torture cults, but written in a dry, ironic, at times almost whimsical idiom, an echo of which I was later to discover in the fiction of John Collier. He worked at night, using a fountain pen, in a bent wood rocking chair with a Hudson Bay blanket draped across his lap and a bottle of bourbon on the table before him. When his work was going well, he could be heard in every corner of the sleeping hotel, rocking and madly rocking, whilst while he subjected his heroes to the gruesome rewards of their passions for unnameable things. As the market for pulp horror dried up in the years after the Second World War, however, the flecked white envelopes with their fabulous New York addresses no longer appeared as so regularly in the Bellic tray on my grandmother's piano. Presently, they ceased to arrive altogether. I know that August Van Zorn tried to make an adjustment. He changed the setting of his tales to the suburbs and laid a greater emphasis on humor, and he tried, without success, to sell these tame and jokey pieces to colliers in the Saturday Evening Post. Then out one Monday morning, when I was 14 years old, of an age to begin to appreciate the work of the anonymous, kindly, self-loathing man who'd been living under the same roof as my grandmother and me for the past 12 years, Honoria Vetch threw herself into the swift little river that flowed past the sanatorium through our town, down to the Yellow Allegheny. Her body was not recovered. On the following Sunday, when my grandmother and I came home from church, she sent me upstairs to take Mr. Vetch his lunch. Ordinarily, she would have gone himself. She always said that neither Mr. Vetch nor I could be trusted not to waste the other one's time, but she was very angry. She was angry with him for having declined, among all the empty Sundays of his life, to go to the church on this one. So she cut the crusts from a pair of chicken sandwiches and set them on a tray along with a salt shaker, a white peach, and a King James Bible, and I climbed the stairs to the room where I found him, with a tiny black-rimmed hole in his left temple, sitting, still slowly rocking, in his bentwood chair, in spite of the fondness for literary gore, and unlike my father, who I gathered had made a mess of things. Our vetch went out neatly and with a minimum of blood. So there you go. That's the first two paragraphs. Long paragraphs, but it's the first two paragraphs of Wonder Boys. It is a slice of life. The Indian world of George Washington's here. Middle. I've been talking a lot about my study buddy for Mittelhochdeutsch. This is the Taschenwörterbuch 38th edition mit den Nachtsteigen von Ulrich Pretzel. So there you go, Ulrich Pretzel. Could look that up. Oh man, so many good books. This one. Talk about this one sometimes. Not that one. That's Bertolt Brecht. That's great. This is Apprentices of Virginia, 1623 to 1800 by Harold B. Gill Jr. So this is part of the Harold B. Gill Jr. Foundation books. I don't know. I've been talking a long time. It's 10:59. I think I'm going to wrap it up. I said I'd talk until I was tired of talking, and I'm pretty much tired of talking now. I don't even know what all I've been visited. But I was started out with a lovely Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian Symbolical Philosophy by Manly P. Hall. The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Yep, a beautiful book. If anyone is here still watching for some reason, thank you. Thank you for your generosity of your time. Nothing like it, really, to be able to talk to people from a distance and not be interrupted, because you can't really interrupt me. I'm just here. I think I saw a little heart. Goodbye. How sweet. So I'm going to wrap it. I've only got 12-cent power. I got to start charging this phone a little bit before I go to bed. So I might stay up late. I like to stay up late. I like to stay up until I start getting delirious. That's some I share with my vocal coach. Good night, and thanks for the book recommendations. Oh, I got more where that came from. What else I got? Oh, this is a good one. Why is there something rather than nothing? 25 questions from great philosophers. Leszek Kolakowski. Should have a fun Mike Kolakowski, I think. I think that's his name. Mike K. Anyway, it's all good. Out here. 11% power. Wow. End live video.